I've been making these wooden molds and casting these concrete garden box panels for around 10 years now. 5 years ago, I made a video showing my first wooden mold design from plywood. In the years since, I refined and simplified the design in an attempt to make them easier to build and to also experiment with making the panels lighter. Not everyone who wants a raised concrete garden bed has the tools or the ability to make their own molds. That's where these new plastic forms come in. Now you don't have to build anything at all. If you can add water to a bag of concrete mix, then you can make these panels. Some years ago, I was involved with vacuum forming molds for making natural soap, so I've had some experience with designing the tooling and the overall manufacturing process of vacuum forming. So for a while now, I've been kicking around the idea of making a plastic or a metal mold for these concrete panels. And I've been asked time and time again if I would sell the molds. Wood is bulky and heavy and expensive to ship, but this thick ABS plastic is light and very strong, so it's the perfect fit for mail order. These molds have the same dimensions and design as my first and second wooden molds. They also have the removable hole-forming pipe system as my fourth and simplest version that I came up with. Right now, I have these in a 36-inch and a 24-inch length, and these make a panel that's 8 inches tall by 2.5 inches thick, and the shape and size of the inset matches the first two designs as well. With these plastic forms, the castings drop right out. No disassembly of the mold is required. To allow for this, the walls of the forms require a very slight draft or taper, if you will. The finished panels and garden boxes look almost identical to my original ones. If you've been making panels already, then these new ones will also fit with the previous ones. Alright, let's mix some concrete and cast some panels. But before I can mix concrete, there's some prep work to do. You will want to have your mold sitting on a strong table or workbench that is level along the length of the mold as well as across the mold. Concrete is a liquid, and we want the molds to be level and filled evenly. If you don't have a spirit level, then there's a level app on most cell phones, or you can set a pipe or a ball on the table and see if it rolls away. But a spirit level will come in handy when building the garden bed. Like all of my molds, you'll need to add some oil to the inside cavity. I've always liked using food-grade non-toxic mineral oil. Vegetable oil will also work, but it can go rancid over time. Motor oil is another good option, but I prefer not to have any residue of that near my garden. A thin, even coat applied with a small sponge or clean rag is all that's needed. Don't apply so much, though, that you end up with any puddles. Also apply oil to the pipes. You'll want to slide them in with the small hole sticking out clear of the flange edge of the form. This small hole will accept a nail and give you a better grip on the pipe for removing it later when the concrete has solidified. For this first pour, I'll just be using the standard ready-mix concrete available at any building supply store. As concrete mix is dusty, I like to mix it outside in a wheelbarrow, then bring that into my shop to shovel into the molds. It's also winter here, so I want the concrete to stay warm while it sets up. I have 60-pound bags of concrete here, and I need only 50, so I'll leave some in the bag. Also, this is good practice in case you add too much water and need to add more dry mix. So I slowly add water while mixing and turning with the shovel. I want the mix to be fully wet, but not to settle like a wheelbarrow full of water. When you shovel the mix, it should still hold its peaks. It might take some practice if you're new to mixing concrete, but be patient. I'm sure I've said this before in other videos, but I really like working with concrete. I think it's such an amazing building medium. It's very long-lasting, durable, and rot-proof, and it can be formed in so many different shapes and for so many applications. And for what you end up with, it's still relatively cheap, especially when you consider the potential lifespan of whatever you're casting. In the shop, I shovel some concrete into the form. Then I give the form a shake to settle the concrete into the corners. You can further settle the mix and get trapped air to come to the surface by tapping the workbench with a rubber mallet. I can then add some more wet mix to top up the form. A small trowel is handy to spread the wet concrete around and toward the corners. Tap or vibrate it again, then smooth it level with the top of the form. You only want the form filled to the top or slightly below. Overfilling will make the panel too thick and may make the hole alignment off when you want to mate it to another panel. Instead of a wheelbarrow and shovel, another way is to mix the concrete in a pail with a high-torque heavy-duty drill and mixing attachment. Some water is first added to the pail, then the dry concrete mix, and then mix it with the drill. More water is added until you get a smooth, wet consistency that's not soupy. Here, the second form is being filled from the pail. This does work, but carrying the pail and pouring it into the form can be challenging for some, so I prefer the wheelbarrow and shovel method myself. I also like to use my reciprocating saw without a blade to vibrate the table to bring any trapped air to the surface. A light troweling will give the inside surface of the panel a smoother finish, and I also do that to make sure it's level to or slightly below the top of the mold cavity. When filled and troweled smooth and level, I cover the forms with plastic. I don't want the concrete to dry much. It undergoes a chemical reaction that generates its own heat as it uses the water in the mix to create strong bonds. I like to keep my shop around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. If it's too cold, it will take the wet concrete longer to harden. In these ideal conditions, the concrete should be solidified enough after 6 hours to remove the pipes. I slide a nail into the small hole in the pipe, and with a twisting motion, I slowly extract the pipes. I think there's some resistance due to the plastic pipe rubbing against the hole in the plastic mold, plus the pipe rubbing against the solidified concrete. I designed the holes in the mold with a tight tolerance and to be just a few thousandths of an inch larger than the diameter of the pipe. So the pipe has an interference fit. It should stay in place, but also be able to slide. I wanted the pipe to make a seal when it's inserted so no wet concrete would leak. So the trade-off can be a little more effort when you go to remove them. At this point, the concrete is still moist and the pipes come out without too much effort. If the pipes are really stuck, then you can give them a gentle tap with a rubber mallet to free them, followed by the twisting and pulling method. This can happen sometimes if I wait longer than 6 hours or so to pull the pipes. Careful not to damage the end of the pipe hit with a rubber mallet. You don't want to flare the end and increase its diameter. With that done, I'll cover the forms with plastic sheets again. I like to leave the concrete in the forms for 2 days at least. Longer if your temperatures are cooler. If you want to add more strength, then you can embed some wire in the concrete in the form of a stiff wire grid down the middle. I use some concrete mesh sections that I cut with small bolt cutters. I also add a spiraling wrap of galvanized fence wire around the pipes. You can wrap this wire around a section of larger diameter pipe first. And I bend the sharp edges in for safety. I run the pipe through the center of this spiral when I'm prepping my molds. These additional steps are optional, but they're easy to do and not very costly. I have a blog post link here for all the details of any additional items or tools you might need. And for a few dollars more per bag, you can buy high-strength concrete mix. And with or without this additional wire and grid, I think it's a good idea to upgrade your concrete mix to a high-strength blend. You end up with a stronger panel and a tough, smooth finish. I rotate the wrap wire upwards while I fill the form halfway. Then shake and vibrate it. And this small trowel helps me get some concrete in behind the pipe where the wire wrap is. Then lay in the grid before topping up the form with more concrete. Instead of the wire mesh, you could use a section of galvanized hog panel or some pieces of rebar laid down the middle. So the first concrete pour has sat for 2 days. Now we need to flip the molds upside down on our workbench. It's best to lift the mold from underneath and place the concrete against the edge of the bench. Then slowly and gently rotate it over. You don't want to stand the form on its thin edge or flange with 50 pounds of concrete in it. Now gently lift the ends in an alternating fashion to free the casting from the mold. When pulling upwards on an end, apply a little downward pressure with your other hand toward the middle of the form. The casting should come out clean. Any excess oil on the concrete can be wiped away with a clean rag. The mold can then be wiped down with a clean cloth to remove any concrete dust or pieces and any leftover mineral oil. I set the new castings on a thick plastic sheet on the floor of my shop. I wrap the plastic up and over the top of the concrete panels like I was wrapping a present. This will hold in the moisture so they don't dry too quickly. After a few days, or up to a week, I then pull them back up on the bench or set them over sawhorses outside. The vacuum forms have a small radius at the top edge, and this can leave a bump on the casting when filled right to the top. After a week of curing, this edge can be removed or dressed with a concrete sanding block. This will ensure your panels have no sharp edges. This only takes a few minutes, and it's important to ensuring they fit together properly when assembling the garden box. I use the smooth side of the rub brick when working around the ends and holes in the casting. I want that inside corner to be sharp and free of any excess concrete. Alternatively, you could use a small concrete or masonry brick for this. The process is identical for the 24-inch panels. Again, I oil the cavity in pipes, slide them into place, mix some concrete and fill the molds halfway. Settle the concrete, then top them up. After 6 hours, the pipes are extracted and the concrete is covered and left to harden further for a couple of days. And I think I slightly overfilled these 24-inch forms. The only thing to note is that the 24-inch panels can take a bit longer to unmold. The shorter mold length reduces the natural flex of the plastic, so it can take a bit more patience to free the castings. I really like the smooth finish you get from casting in these plastic molds. I have noticed a few more surface bubbles in some places though. I'm speculating that the wood molds are porous, so trapped air has somewhere to go, whereas the plastic is a solid barrier to any air movement. Over beside one of our rainwater tanks, I have a proper place to assemble the concrete panels and make a raised bed. I already have a 1/2-inch water line underground that's secured to a wooden stake. We had some squash growing in a mound of soil here last year. For this bed assembly, I'll need a level, a framing square, a rubber mallet, and some 12-inch long pieces of 3/8 rebar, along with a shovel, a grubber, wheelbarrow, and some sand. I'll measure and mark the approximate location of the rectangular bed. I'll be using 6 36-inch panels here. I'll use these 12-inch sections of rebar to roughly mark the corners. Then I'll scrape away the dirt to make a shallow trench. Then I'll scrape a bit more, trying to get it pretty close to level. Now I'll add a few inches of sand to this trench. Fine crushed gravel would also work here as well. I can then smooth it out and pack it underfoot. The sand or gravel will help hold the panels in place as you set the rebar in, as these panels have that slight draft angle from the molds. And the sand or gravel will give water a place to drain away if rain or irrigation water fills the holes in the panels. Then I'll bring back the spirit level and scrape forward and back, trying to get the sand layer as level as possible. Now I'll bring in the panels and set the first one in place, and adjust it until it's level and set into the sand. And I'll bring in the second one and square it to the first. And slide in a piece of rebar to pin the corner together. The rebar should go in without any resistance. If so, check your hole alignment or wiggle the panels a bit to make them closer together. It may seem overly fussy using a level and a square here, but the panels are designed to go together when the corners meet at 90 degrees and they're all on the same level plane. So I'd say it's worth the effort to get them placed right the first time and never have to worry about it again. The third panel is aligned end to end with the second one, and I'll check that it's in line and level. My trench was a bit undersized, so I had to scrape some soil away to fit and square the next panel to the first one. Then the fifth one is slid into place and rebar dropped in. And a few more checks with the square to see if anything's moved. And I'll measure side to side to see if the last panel will fit. Again, I needed to remove a bit of dirt and add some sand as my trench on the end was a bit off. With the final panel pinned in place, I added a bit of sand around the inside edge before tapping the rebar into the ground with a rubber mallet. I can now add some soil to this raised bed. From start to finish, that took just over 20 minutes. And here's the square box using the 24-inch panels. So let me know what you think of these new plastic molds, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below. In the next episode, I'll try a few lightweight concrete blends in these new molds, so watch for that coming right up. Also, I have written step-by-step casting instructions on my website, and I'll put a link to that up here in the cards and in the description below. Alright, that's it for now. We'll see you next time.